Gabriella Carson nearly dropped the tray of mini quiches when a sleek black Rolls-Royce pulled up to the front of the glass building. She wasn't even supposed to be here. Her cousin had called her at 5:30 that morning sobbing about food poisoning, begging her to fill in for the biggest catering job of the month, a high-stakes corporate lunch at O'Connell Tech's Manhattan headquarters. Gabriella had rolled out of bed, tossed her hair into a bun, and thrown on the catering company's polo shirt, fully expecting to just blend into the background and keep the food hot. But now, as the driver opened the car door and a tall man in a tailored navy suit stepped out, Gabriella froze. He had the kind of presence that made everyone else blur at the edges. Sharp jawline, dark blonde hair slightly tousled, and eyes that scanned the street like he owned it. Which, judging by the way the security guard straightened the second he saw him, he probably did. "Is that," whispered Leela, one of the other servers, nudging Gabriella with her elbow. "That's Preston O'Connell, the guy who runs this place. Like Millionaire CEO, Forbes cover, all that." Gabriella rolled her eyes. "Good for him. Can you grab the tray of lemon tarts?" "These are sliding." But inside, her heart beat a little faster. She knew who Preston O'Connell was. Everyone in New York did. He was the kind of man who made headlines. Tech genius, investment mogul, and most annoyingly impossibly good-looking. Still, Gabriella wasn't here to ogle rich men. She was here to make sure the chicken skewers didn't get cold. By the time the conference room was set up, white-clothed tables, rows of gleaming silver chafing dishes, and perfectly lined hors d'oeuvres, Gabriella had mostly forgotten about the man from the car. Until she turned around and almost collided with him. "Whoa," he said, steadying her with one hand on her arm. "You okay?" Gabriella stepped back, flustered. "Yeah, sorry, just hot trays and sharp corners." He studied her for a second, then glanced at her name tag. "Gabriella," she tilted her head. "That's me, and you're Preston," he said with a faint grin, "but I think you already knew that." "Maybe," she said, trying to keep a straight face. "You're kind of plastered on half the subway ads." He laughed, low and surprisingly warm. "Guilty?" She started to step away, but he said, "Wait, did you make these?" He gestured toward the trays. "No," she said. "I just heated them up and made sure no one dropped a bruschetta." "You don't look like a caterer." Gabriella raised an eyebrow. "And what do caterers look like?" He held up his hands. "That came out wrong. I just meant you seem different, confident, like you're not afraid to tell someone off if they ask for gluten-free at the last second." "That's because I'm not," she said, half smiling. "Good. We need more of that around here." He looked like he wanted to say more, but someone called his name from across the room. "I should go," she said, nodding toward the kitchen. "Wait." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a card. "If you ever decide you want to do something other than heating up trays, give me a call. I think you'd be good at running things." She stared at the card. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," he said, and then turned and walked away. Gabriella slipped the card into her pocket, fully intending to throw it away later. She didn't. 3 days passed. Gabriella went back to her job at the community center kitchen, helping teach cooking classes and coordinating events. Her life was simple, predictable, exactly how she liked it. But then a courier showed up at the back entrance with a black envelope. Inside was a note written in elegant handwriting. "Gabriella, I have a fundraising event Friday night. I need someone I trust to oversee the catering team. It pays well. Let me know if you're interested." Preston below was an address on Fifth Avenue and a time. Gabriella stared at the note for a long time. "Are you seriously not going?" her coworker Kara asked, peering over her shoulder. "That man's loaded." "And did you see the way he looked at you?" "That's exactly why I shouldn't go," Gabriella muttered. But Friday night, she found herself stepping into a black car that had been sent for her, wearing the only cocktail dress she owned and a pair of heels she hadn't worn since her cousin's wedding. The venue was ridiculous. A rooftop ballroom with floor-to-ceiling windows, chandeliers that looked like they belonged in Versailles, and guests in tuxedos and designer gowns sipping champagne like it was tap water. "Gabriella," Preston said as he approached her, looking devastating in a black suit, "you came." "You didn't really give me a chance to say no," she said. He smiled. "That was the idea." She should have been annoyed. But the way he looked at her like she was the only person in the room who mattered made her forget why, throughout the night, she kept things running smoothly. She directed servers, checked the food stations, and made sure the guests were happy. But every time she passed Preston, their eyes met. And each time it felt a little harder to look away. At one point, she caught him watching her from across the room. He didn't look away when she noticed. Later, when the event wound down and the guests filtered out, Gabriella started gathering her things. "Stay," Preston said, walking up behind her. She turned. "For what? I have a bottle of wine upstairs and a view of the city even better than this one." She hesitated. "This isn't a date, I know," he said. "But I'm hoping it might become one." She looked at him, really looked, and for the first time she let herself wonder what it would be like to say yes. "Okay," she said softly. "One glass," he smiled, but it wasn't smug, it was hopeful, and that scared her more than anything. Gabriella followed Preston into the private elevator tucked behind a mirrored column, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor. Neither of them spoke as they ascended past dozens of glittering floors, the silence electric with something neither had defined yet. When the elevator doors opened, she stepped into a penthouse that felt like the inside of a magazine spread sleek slate walls, sculpted furniture, and a panoramic view of Manhattan that looked like it had been painted by a god. He wandered into the open kitchen, pulling 2 crystal glasses from a cabinet and uncorking a bottle of something she didn't recognize. She stayed near the windows, arms crossed, trying to appear more composed than she felt. "You didn't expect to like it tonight, did you?" he said as he handed her a glass. "I didn't expect to be here at all." He leaned against the counter. "What changed your mind?" Gabriella took a sip before answering. The wine was dry, expensive, and completely wasted on her unrefined palate. Still, she didn't let that show. "You caught me off guard," she said. "That note, it was bold." "I don't like waiting around for things I want," Preston said simply. "You mean people," she corrected. He gave a faint nod. "Sometimes." She looked out over the city. "You're used to getting your way, aren't you?" "I'm used to earning it." She turned back toward him. "What exactly are you hoping to earn?" There was no hesitation in his voice when he said, "Time with you." Gabriella exhaled, unsure if it was from surprise or something else. "That's a risky investment. I don't come with a guarantee." "Neither do I." She set her glass down. "Preston, I don't know what you think this is, but I'm not someone you can pull out of a crowd, and I didn't pull you out of a crowd," he interrupted. "I noticed you because you weren't trying to be noticed. You were just doing your job, but you had this presence like you were the only one in the room who wasn't pretending." She didn't answer right away. The honesty in his voice unsettled her more than any charm could have. "I've worked hard to build my life," she said finally. "It's small, but it's mine. I don't want to be part of someone else's world if it means losing mine." "You wouldn't lose anything," he said. "I'm not asking you to change. But you're not exactly playing by the same rules, are you?" Preston set his glass down beside hers. "You're right. I live in a world that doesn't make sense most of the time, but I'm not asking you to become part of it overnight." "I just want a chance." Gabriella hesitated. "You're serious?" "I don't do anything halfway." She looked at him, really looked, and for a moment, the polished surface he wore like armor slipped. There was something behind his eyes, something worn, something that had nothing to do with boardrooms or Forbes lists. "I need to go," she said softly. He didn't try to stop her. "Will you let me see you again?" "I don't know," she said honestly. "But thank you for the wine." When the elevator doors closed behind her, Gabriella leaned back against the wall, trying to steady her thoughts. Everything about Preston was unexpected. He wasn't what she'd feared, arrogant, entitled, detached. He was something else entirely. And that made him more dangerous than she'd anticipated. The next morning, Gabriella arrived back at the community kitchen before the sun had fully risen. She tied her apron and dove into the prep work, chopping onions and sorting produce like her hands could outpace her thoughts. Kara watched her curiously but didn't press, knowing better than to poke the bear before coffee. At noon, the center's director pulled Gabriella aside. "You've got a visitor." She wiped her hands on her apron. "Tell them I'm busy." He said it's important. When she stepped out into the front hallway, she found a delivery man holding a large navy box tied with a silver ribbon. Miss Carson, he asked. Yeah, she said warily. He handed her the box and a small envelope. She waited until he left before opening the note inside, for the woman who doesn't like being surprised but might secretly enjoy it anyway. Inside the box was a chef's knife unlike any she had ever seen, hand-forged steel, a polished wooden handle, and her name engraved on the blade. Not flashy, not excessive, just incredibly personal. Kara peeked around the corner. Is that a bribe or a proposal? Gabriella stared at the knife in her hand. I'm not sure yet. That evening, she found herself walking down the cobblestone path of a small park she hadn't visited in years. Preston was already there, sitting on a bench under a canopy of string lights hung between the trees. He stood when he saw her, that same unreadable expression on his face. I didn't expect you to come, he admitted. I didn't plan on it. He motioned to the bench. Sit, she did, leaving a few inches between them. I've never done this like this, he said. Not with someone who doesn't already know what I am. You mean rich, he laughed softly. I meant complicated. I'm not exactly low maintenance either, he glanced at her. Good. They sat in silence for a moment, watching a pair of kids chase each other through the grass in the fading light. I grew up around here, Gabriella said. Used to come to this park with my dad. He'd bring sandwiches and we'd sit on that hill over there. Is he still around? No, she said. Cancer, hit fast, left faster. I'm sorry, she nodded, eyes on the horizon. I think he'd like this, you, maybe. Jury's still out. I can live with that. When they finally stood to leave, Preston walked her to the edge of the park but didn't press for anything more. She turned to him before heading toward the subway. Don't buy me anything else. He raised an eyebrow but said nothing. If you want to see me, she continued, use your words, not your wallet. Preston nodded once. Deal. As she disappeared into the crowd, he stood still for a long time, hands in his pockets, the city buzzing around him. Something in his world had shifted. And it had nothing to do with power or money. The air was thick with the scent of cinnamon and browning butter as Gabriella pulled a tray of apple galettes from the oven. A light dusting of flour streaked her cheek, and her apron looked like it had survived a flour storm, but she didn't notice. Her focus was on cutting each pastry with precision, arranging them neatly on a platter for that afternoon's charity bake sale. You've been humming the same line of that song for 20 minutes, Kara said from the other counter, elbow deep in a bowl of cookie dough. Gabriella blinked. What? You're humming, again, and it's the same 3 notes. Gabriella wiped her hands and leaned against the counter. I didn't even realize. Kara gave her a knowing look. So, when's the next date with Mr. Tall Dark and buys you knives? Gabriella didn't answer right away. He wants to take me somewhere this weekend, said it's a surprise. Let me guess, helicopter ride, yacht, private concert? He said it's not flashy, just something he wants to share. Kara raised an eyebrow. That man's version of not flashy is probably a castle in the Alps. Gabriella laughed under her breath, but truthfully, she was wondering the same thing. Preston hadn't reached out every day since the night in the park, but when he did, it never felt performative. His texts were short, deliberate, and oddly thoughtful. Once he sent her a photo of a chipped spice rack in his kitchen, asking if it was beyond saving or if she could work her kitchen magic on it. Where exactly is he taking you? Kara asked. He just said to be ready by 5. And to wear something warm. Kara leaned closer. You think he's serious? I think he's trying to be, and I think I'm trying not to be scared of that. By the time Friday arrived, Gabriella's nerves were a quiet undercurrent beneath her calm exterior. As she stepped out of the community center, she found Preston leaning against a deep blue vintage Aston Martin parked along the curb. He wore a dark charcoal coat over a sweater and jeans, and his hair was tousled by the wind in a way that felt too natural for someone who usually looked ready for a magazine cover. You're early, she said. He opened the passenger door for her. You're worth that. As they drove north, the city melted away into golden trees and winding roads. Gabriella rested her hand on the window, watching the blur of orange and rust-colored leaves rush past. You always this quiet before surprises? He asked. I'm trying to guess where we're going. If you guess it, I'll turn around. Really? No, he said, glancing over with a grin, but I'll pretend to be impressed. They reached a gated property nestled in the woods just before sunset. The house was modest by Preston's standards: 2 stories, weathered wood siding, and a wraparound porch that overlooked a lake reflecting the sky in deep pinks and purples. "This was my grandfather's," Preston said as he turned off the engine. "He built it after retiring from the Navy. I used to come here every summer until I turned 16 and stopped making time for things that weren't urgent." "It's beautiful," Gabriella said, stepping out. "It smells like pine and old books." Inside, the cabin was filled with worn leather chairs, a stone fireplace, and shelves crammed with nautical memorabilia. A single photograph rested on the mantel, a younger Preston standing beside an older man holding a fishing pole, both of them soaked and laughing. Gabriella noticed the way his eyes lingered on it. "I haven't been back in years," he said. "Didn't realize how much I missed it." "Why bring me here?" she asked gently. "Because I wanted you to see something that matters to me." He looked at her, his voice quieter now. "Everything else in my life is polished and planned. This place is the opposite. And it's the only thing I've never used to impress anyone." She followed him outside to the back porch, where 2 mugs of cider sat on a small table. A blanket was draped over the swing, and a small fire pit crackled nearby. The lake shimmered in the last slivers of daylight, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. "When I met you," Preston said, "I hadn't realized how much of my life had become a performance. Meetings, events, people trying to sell me things or sell themselves. It was all noise. But then you walked into that room and didn't try to be anyone but yourself." Gabriella shifted slightly. "I didn't expect you to notice me." "I noticed everything," he said, "especially how you looked like you didn't belong there and how you didn't care." She looked down at her mug. "I did care. I just didn't want anyone to see it." "I saw it anyway." The air between them tightened, not with tension but with something more delicate, a kind of fragile truth neither of them had dared name yet. "I'm not good at this," she said. "Letting someone in." "I'm not asking for all of you at once," he said. "Just a window, just tonight." She looked at him, the firelight casting soft shadows across his face. "You're not what I expected, Preston." "Neither are you, Gabriella." They sat on the swing, sharing the blanket, warmth sinking into their bones as the stars carved open the sky above the lake. His hand brushed hers once, then again, and when she didn't pull away, he laced their fingers together. "I don't want this to be temporary," he said after a while. She didn't look at him. "Then don't make it feel like it is." He turned to her, his voice steady. "Let me take you out next weekend, not somewhere fancy, just somewhere real. You pick." She met his gaze. "I'll think about it." As they drove back toward the city that night, Gabriella leaned her head against the window, watching the woods blur into silence. Preston didn't speak, but his hand stayed resting on her knee, thumb moving gently along the fabric of her jeans like he was trying to memorize something quietly. And Gabriella felt it, the shift, the beginning of the part where something real begins, not a fairy tale, not a performance. Just 2 people trying to find something honest in the chaos. The first thing Gabriella noticed when she stepped into the gallery was the silence. Not the sterile kind that clings to high-end spaces, but a thoughtful, reverent hush like the walls were holding their breath. Preston stood near the far end, hands clasped behind his back, studying a large canvas in muted blues and ash-gray strokes. He didn't turn when she entered, but she knew he'd heard her. The receptionist had already buzzed her in, clearly expecting her. "You said we weren't doing anything fancy," she said, walking toward him. "I didn't lie," Preston replied. "The artist is a friend. He lent us the space for the evening, no guests, no cameras, just you and me." She stopped beside him, looking up at the painting. "It's beautiful." "What is it?" "His daughter painted it before she passed," Preston said quietly. "He never sold it, just hung it here to feel close to her." Gabriella's gaze softened. "You've known him a long time." "He was my mother's friend. She used to bring me here when I was a kid." I didn't understand anything back then, just thought the paintings looked weird, but she'd stand in front of them like they were speaking to her. Gabriella glanced at him. "You never talk about her." He nodded, still focused on the canvas. "She died in a car accident when I was 17. It gutted my father. He buried himself in work and I followed his lead. It was easier than feeling anything. Gabriella didn't press. She let the silence stretch, giving him space. Finally, he turned to face her. I've spent most of my life surrounded by people who only tell me what they think I want to hear. But you call me out, you don't care if I'm comfortable, and you never play games. I don't have the energy for games, she said. And I definitely don't have the wardrobe for them. Preston smiled, that rare, real smile she'd begun to recognize. You make me want to be better, not for the headlines or the boardroom, but because I want to be the kind of man who deserves you. Her breath caught just slightly. You don't have to be anyone else, she said after a moment. You just have to stop hiding behind all the noise. He stepped closer. I don't want noise, I want real. She hesitated, her voice quieter now. Then don't disappear when it gets hard. Don't shut down if I challenge you. Because I will. I want you to, he said without flinching. They stood there, surrounded by brushstrokes and old memories, and Gabriella felt it something shifting between them. Not just chemistry, not just attraction, something deeper, something earned. Later that evening, they sat on the rooftop of the gallery, wrapped in blankets, a small table between them stacked with takeout containers from a nearby noodle shop. No staff, no servers, just two people eating straight from cartons under a sky full of stars. Preston set his chopsticks down. I've been thinking about that card I gave you the day we met. She raised an eyebrow. The one you never expected me to use. I didn't give it to you to recruit you. I gave it to you because for the first time in months I felt like I wasn't performing. She leaned back, folding her arms. And now I'm thinking about what it would look like if we stopped pretending this is temporary. Gabriella didn't respond right away. The wind tugged at a strand of her hair, and he reached over, tucking it behind her ear with a gentleness that surprised her. I'm not asking for forever, he said. Not tonight, but I am asking for something real, with you. Every part of you, the woman who runs kitchens, who doesn't flinch when life gets messy, who never bites her tongue, I want all of it. She looked at him, her voice steady. I don't want to be a chapter in someone else's story. I've built something from nothing. I need to know you're not going to rewrite it. I don't want to rewrite your story, he said. I want to be part of the next page. The honesty knocked the air out of her chest. She reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his. Okay, let's see what the next page looks like. 3 weeks later, Gabriella stood at the entrance of a renovated space on the Lower East Side. Exposed brick walls, polished concrete floors, and a brand new industrial kitchen gleamed under the warm glow of pendant lights. A temporary banner hung above the door, Carson Culinary Community Grand Opening. Inside, people buzzed around, tasting samples, signing up for classes, and chatting with local chefs. Gabriella moved through the space with practiced calm, answering questions, checking stations, and making sure the opening ran smooth as buttercream. Preston stood near the back, watching her with quiet pride. He hadn't made any grand declarations. No ribbon-cutting ceremonies or speeches, just steady support from the moment she told him about the vacant building on Stanton Street. He'd helped pull strings, navigate permits, and secure funding. But he never tried to take over. It's yours, he'd said, handing her the final paperwork weeks ago. I'm just giving it a nudge. Now, as the crowd spilled onto the sidewalk and music filtered through the air, Gabriella turned to find him waiting with 2 glasses of champagne. Thought you might need this, he said, offering her one. She took it, clinking it lightly against his. To nudges. To everything that comes after, he said. As the sun dipped behind the buildings, casting golden light through the tall windows, he pulled her gently into his arms. Not in grand display, not for the cameras, just something real, and Gabriella knew this wasn't a borrowed world she was stepping into. It was her world, one she'd built, one he'd respected, and now they were building something together. One honest moment at a time. Preston adjusted the cuff of his shirt as the final guest filtered out of the Carson Culinary Community's first donor gala. The space had been transformed for the night. Ivory linens, soft jazz echoing from a quartet in the corner, and votive candles flickering against the exposed brick walls. But Gabriella had insisted on one detail: no velvet ropes, no distance. Guests sat shoulder to shoulder with instructors and students, the same way her kitchen operated, without pretense. She emerged from the back, cheeks flushed from the heat of the kitchen. A few strands of hair had slipped loose from the twist at the nape of her neck, and flour lingered on the corner of her sleeve. Preston's pulse kicked up. She had just orchestrated a 5-course dinner for over 70 people, secured 2 new endowments, and still looked at him like he was the only one in the room worth seeing. "You didn't have to stay the whole time," she said, reaching for a bottle of water on the bar. "I didn't have to," Preston replied. "I wanted to." Gabriella leaned against the edge of the counter. "I saw you talking to Mr. Donnelly. Did he give you his usual 10-minute lecture about economic impact zones?" "No," Preston said. "He gave me a check, a large one. Said he hadn't seen this much purpose wrapped in a dinner party since his daughter's wedding." Her eyebrows lifted. "Seriously? Seriously?" Preston let his hand rest against the small of her back. "You're changing this neighborhood, Gabs." She looked at him, and something in her expression shifted. He could see it, a decision clicking into place. "I've been thinking," she said, "about what we're doing, about this." He straightened slightly. "What about it? I know I've been cautious." "You've been patient, but I'm not afraid anymore." She took a step closer, her voice steady. "This kitchen, this project, it's mine. You didn't ask me to give it up. You didn't try to reshape it. You just stood next to me and helped me build it stronger." "I've never had that before." Preston didn't say anything. He let her speak, let her own it. "I've always thought love was something that would derail me," she continued, her voice softer now. "Something that would ask me to shrink, but you made space. You didn't ask me to fold myself into your world, you just made room in it." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, linen-wrapped box. Gabriella blinked, startled. "I wasn't going to do this tonight," Preston said. "I had a whole plan, a dinner, a skyline. Some ridiculous rooftop thing with string lights, but that's not us." He opened the box. Inside, nestled on a band of platinum, was a single round diamond flanked by 2 tiny sapphires. Understated, elegant, unmistakably hers. Gabriella covered her mouth, eyes suddenly glassy. "I love you," Preston said, voice low but certain. "Not the idea of you, not the version that fits into gala nights or press photos. I love the woman who runs 5 burners at once while telling a donor to stop asking about gluten. I love the way you fight for what you've built. And I want to spend my life fighting beside you." She stared at him, stunned, silent. "You don't have to answer now," he said, "but I'd like to go home tonight knowing you're thinking about a forever we build together." Gabriella reached forward, closed the box, and slid it back into his palm. "I don't need to think about it," she whispered. "I choose you. I've already been choosing you." Then she wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him, slow and deep, like every fear she'd ever held had finally fallen quiet. They didn't go to dinner. They stayed in the kitchen, barefoot and laughing as Preston helped her stack the leftover plates and sneak bites of chocolate mousse straight from the tray. They danced to the fading music of the jazz quartet's Warm Down, swaying in the center of the empty room, Gabriella's head against his chest and his arms around her waist. 6 months later, the Carson culinary community expanded to a second location in Brooklyn. Gabriella ran both kitchens with a small team of instructors, many of them former students. She refused to let the mission change. No frills, no gatekeeping, just access, passion, and second chances. Preston didn't try to change that. Instead, he opened a tech mentorship program in the same building, offering teens access to internships, coding workshops, and real-world job placement. At night, he came home to Gabriella, who greeted him with a kiss and a scolding if he forgot to take off his shoes. They were married in the same park where Gabriella had once told him about her father. There were no chandeliers or orchestras, just a small group of friends, a string trio, and a long table filled with home-cooked food. Gabriella wore a dress with pockets. Preston wore a navy suit with his grandfather's cufflinks. After the ceremony, Gabriella stood barefoot in the grass, glass of wine in hand, watching the sun dip below the skyline. Preston came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Still think love is meant to derail you?" he asked. She leaned back against him. "No, I think it's meant to reroute you into something better." He kissed the side of her neck, his voice warm in her ear. "Then here's to every reroute that brought us here." As the first dance began and the music floated into the golden evening, Gabriella turned in his arms and whispered, "You're my favorite surprise." Preston smiled, holding her close as they moved together under the soft glow of string lights. And in that moment, surrounded by laughter, clinking glasses, and the kind of love that didn't ask either of them to bend just to build, they knew they had everything they'd ever need. Together.